morning, Lakeside. We're so glad that you're here today. Let's join together and worship. Bring some power, a sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger. The King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder, who leaves us breathless and awe and wonder. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place. That you would bear my cross. You laid down your life. And I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I thank you for all that you've done for me. Brings our chaos back into order and makes the orphan a son and daughter. The King of glory, the King of glory, who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance. The King of glory, the King above all kings. Yeah, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place. That you would bear my cross. You laid down your life. That I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place. God, that you would bear my cross. You laid down your life. I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. All that you've done, God. Oh, this is why we sing.
Good morning, Lakeside. I'm Kara, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. So this week, Lakeside Student Ministry will be back to meeting in person, which is so exciting. We're so excited to be together again. And so here are the details. So it's for all students, grades 6 through 12, and that's including students who have graduated. And they're invited to join on Wednesday evenings at 6:30 for food, games, and so much more. For more information on this, you can check out our website, social media spots, or you can sign up for our e-newsletter. Another way to stay connected at Lakeside is by filling out a connection card, which you can find on the tables in the back of the auditorium. And then after the service, you can drop them in the white boxes. The connection card is a great way for us to get to know you better, for you to stay connected at Lakeside, and with your prayer requests. And, sorry. So, the prayer requests is great because each week our staff sits down and we pray for all the requests that are sent in. If it's your first time at Lakeside, we have a special gift for you if you fill out your connection card and you bring it to the coffee bar in the back. And it's a kind of like a way of saying thank you for being here today. For those of you watching virtually, there are links on the streaming page and on our website to do this. And we really want to hear from you. Now, for if a special welcome, and we want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have given financially. Your finances and your graciousness have allowed us to do so many things like provide a fun and meaningful ministry for the students in our community. If you would like to donate, there are donation boxes and there are envelopes in the back of the auditorium. If you're watching virtually, there's a link on the website to do this. Or you can simply mail a check to the church. Now, if you would stand and join us in worship, we have a few more songs. On the clouds, kings and kingdoms will bow
Jesus' blood and righteousness, I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love, and through the storm, yes, He is Lord. He's Lord of all. Yes, He is. When darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. My anchor holds within the veil. And Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love. And through the storm, yes, He is Lord. He's Lord of all. Oh, He is Lord. He's Lord of all. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, yes, He is Lord, Lord of all. He shall come with the trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless stand before the throne. Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, yes, He is Lord, Lord of all. Sing Christ alone, Christ alone, cornerstone, the weak
couple weeks ago, I got a brand new phone. I was holding out for a while because now every phone's the size of an iPad, and it's just ridiculous. So once a little bit of a smaller model was delivered, I'm like, yeah, that's the phone that I want. So I ordered the phone, and I'm like a kid on Christmas anytime there's new technology. And so I'm checking the tracking, even though I'm not at home for when the package is going to be delivered. It just sets my heart at ease to know that the package has been delivered, and so I'm refreshing the tracking, and then I see that it's been delivered at the house, and so I go home that night, and then the boys wanted to play video games, so I played video games with the boys, and then it was time for them to go to bed, so we put them to bed, and then it was finally time to unbox the new phone. Of course, I also got my wife a new phone, so I transferred everything over to her phone first, and then I transferred everything over to my phone, and we got a lot more storage because on our old phones, it was this constant game of do we delete a video of the boys or do we download a new app? And so we didn't have to do that anymore once we got the new phones, and so after I got her phone set up, I set up my phone and started downloading new apps, and it was just a great night of me and technology. And wonderful evening in our marriage. And then we went to bed, and I got up the next morning and grabbed my phone and was driving into work, and all of a sudden my phone rang, and I answered it, and it was my sister. And she started talking and kept talking, and was talking some more. And then at some point, the phone call was just lost, and that happens sometimes. And so I'm like, just the tower, dropped the call. So she called right back, answered the phone, and then she kept talking and talking a little bit more. And then she stopped talking and was waiting for me to talk. And so I started talking. Guys, let me help you out. If you're ever in a conversation, particularly with a lady, and there's a long pause, it's either because you're in a lot of trouble or it's because she's waiting for you to say something. And doesn't get you very far. And if you just keep saying that, then you're going to see the first scenario. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I started talking, and she said, are you there? Hello? I can't hear you. And so I started talking louder, as though that was going to solve the problem. I don't know why. But I'm essentially shouting into the phone at this point. She's like, I can't hear you. So I hang up the phone. I'm like, man, she needs to get a better phone. There's something wrong with her phone. And so I call somebody else. They're like, why do you sound like you're a robot? I'm like, oh, great. Oh, great. So the whole point of buying a phone is to communicate. That's the whole point of phones. Now, I know that if you're under 40, you would really just prefer to have nothing but text conversations because nobody talks on the phone anymore. And if you're over 50, this fact really annoys you. And you're like, don't send me an LOL or an emoji. Pick up the phone and call me on my birthday. Don't text me or Happy Mother's Day. No, pick up the phone and call me. But if you're under 40, you're like, I really wish people couldn't call me on the phone. I just wish everybody could text me. But there I am with a brand new phone, and the whole point of why the phone was originally invented was to communicate, and I couldn't communicate on the brand new device. What we see in life is that communication is very important. It's very important. In fact, when you look at most of the problems that you experience in life, the vast majority of them boiled down to communication. Either something wasn't clearly communicated or something was clearly communicated, and it just was a different perspective than what somebody else thought they were going to hear. But when you think about your relationships, I'm willing to bet that most of the tension that you've experienced in your relationships has been a direct result of either over-communication or not communicating clearly. When you think about your tensions in your workplace, the vast majority of tension in the workplace is a result of communication. It's not that people have different values or different visions. I mean, that happens sometimes. But the vast majority of time, the tension in the workplace boils down to this idea of communication. We see it all the time in the sporting world. We see it all the time in friendships. And whatever you're passionate about, I guarantee you can point to issues where the biggest issue has been communication. And oftentimes in life, that is just the biggest factor when things go sour. It is directly linked to communication. This morning, as we wrap up What Now, we're going to see a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples. It was just hours after Jesus had washed their feet, and he'd sat them around the dinner table, and he told them, one of you is going to betray me. Of course, talking about Judas. It was just hours after he instituted communion. And now he's having a lot of conversations with his disciples. And we're going to look at one of those conversations this morning. So if you have your phones or your tablets and you want to follow along with us, we'd invite you to do so via the Bible app. And once you're in the Bible app, just go down to the events section, and then you'll see Lakeside Community Church if your location services are enabled. If you're watching online or you don't have your location services enabled here, just type in zip code 54201. Again, that's 54201. Lakeside Community Church will pop up, and you can follow along there with us as we look at John 16, and we're going to start in verse 29 this morning, where we read these words. His disciples, Jesus' disciples, said, now you are speaking plainly and not using figurative speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God. Jesus answered them, do you now believe? Do you now believe? So here, John peels back the curtain for us and gives us this conversation that Jesus had with his disciples just hours before he would be crucified. And what do they arrive at? They arrive at the point where the disciples are, we finally get it. We finally get it. After 3 years of watching Jesus perform miracle after miracle, of healing people who were sick, of turning water into wine, of feeding thousands of people, just you name it. They watched Jesus do this, of calming storms. They saw some of the most miraculous things. They heard Jesus speak. They heard him speak often. Sometimes they didn't always understand it because he talked in parables, and they would have to ask him afterwards, what were you talking about? But after a 3-year journey, of investigating Jesus and going around with Jesus, they reach this point, and they're like, we finally get it. We finally get it. We finally believe. And check this out. I just love this. This is their conclusion. Now that they finally believe Jesus, this is their conclusion. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question. I love that. That's hilarious to me. It's like, oh, now that we finally get it, we know that you don't need people to question you. It's kind of like a kid looking at their parent and being like, well, you don't need me to tell you to eat your vegetables anymore. I mean, really? That's their proof that now they finally understand it. They're like, okay, Jesus, you don't need anybody to ask you questions because we understand it now. But that's where they were. That's where they were. And they say, we believe. We believe in you. And Jesus asks a question, do you? Do you? That's the question that Jesus asked for them. At the point that they say, we finally believe, Jesus doesn't respond with, that's awesome, that's fantastic, I'm so glad to hear that. He asks the question, do you? The question is, do you really? Do you really believe in me? Do you really believe in me? And I know we live in a post-Christian society in an age where people don't as readily identify as being Christian as what they used to. But the question that all of us should ask ourselves who identify as followers of Jesus is this question of, are we really? Is this something that we really believe? When the rubber meets the road, when it's time for us to put our money where our mouth is this really our identity? Do we really believe this? And the implications for this we're going to see in a minute, and why this is so important, and the benefit that it has for those of us who are Jesus followers. But the question must be asked, and we must ask ourselves, as Jesus asked them, do you really? Do we really? Now, what message you might be saying to yourself, what message did they say that they finally understood? So we're going to go back just one verse into John 16:28, where we read this verse. Jesus says this, I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father. And so they say, this is the message that we believe. And what is this message? This is the message of the gospel. This is the message of the gospel. This is the crux of what they say we believe. This is the entire reason that Jesus came. The message of the gospel. And what is that message? The message is that God loves you. That God loves you and me. That God created you. God created everything. And he loves you. But God's the creator. So God gets to make the rules. And God has a standard. And his standard isn't good enough. God's standard is perfection. And none of us, no matter how good we are, measure up. Some of us are better than others of us. But none of us measure up to that standard, which is God's right to make that standard because he created everything. And so God gets to make the rules. And his rule is, the standard is perfection. And we don't measure up. But in spite of the fact that we don't measure up, in spite of the fact that all of us have fallen short of that standard of God, God still loves you incredibly so anyways. Now there's a cost to be paid because we don't measure up to that standard. And that cost, the Bible tells us, is death. The cost of our sin is death. And that's a physical death that we'll all experience, but it's also a spiritual death that is eternity apart from God in a place the Bible calls hell. That's just the reality that God is holy and he is perfect. And God's standard is holiness and perfection. And none of us measure up to that standard. But in spite of the fact that you and I do not measure up, in spite of the fact that we have rebelled against our Creator, in spite of the fact that God gets to make the rules and none of us can meet his standard, he still loves us incredibly. So much so that he made a way for us to experience a relationship with him anyway. So God came to this world in Jesus. The Bible tells us that God made him, Jesus, who had no sin, who was perfect, to be sin for you and for me, so that in him we could have a restored relationship with God. That's the hope of why Jesus came. That is the gospel. That is the message that Jesus was talking about. And how would he achieve this? Well, hours after this conversation, he would go to pay the price for all of my mistakes, for all of my shortcomings, for every lie that I've ever told, for anything that I have ever stolen, for every outburst of anger that I have had. And the list could go on and on and on. But every single one of my imperfections, hours after this conversation, would be put on Jesus, and he would pay the price because I can't measure up and because I don't. Because in spite of the fact that I don't meet his standard, he still loves me. And he did the same for you. That the weight of every mistake that you have ever made was placed upon him. That he would die. Because the cost of sin is death. And so he would pay the price for me and for you. But 3 days later, he would rise again. And he would prove that he was victorious over all of my mistakes, over all of my shortcomings, that God is greater, and that he had made a way for me to once again experience a relationship with my Creator, whom I had rebelled against, because he loves me. And he loves you. Jesus tells his disciples who'd followed him for 3 years, I am about to go do this. And they say, we finally get it. We finally believe. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we? Because that's the question that Jesus asked them when they reached that conclusion, is do we really believe it? We continue. Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come, when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. And here Jesus tells them what's to come. He's saying, just hours from now, you will all run. You will all run from me. You will leave me. I know that you say you believe me. I know one of you just moments ago promised me that you will follow me even if it means you will die. But I'm telling you, you will all run away. And what does this tell us about the incredible love of God? It tells us that in the incredible love of God, you can do nothing. You can do nothing to make God stop loving you. You can do nothing, because here, just hours after he would say this, the disciples, when Jesus was arrested and when he would be crucified, they all ran, they all fled because they were scared. They weren't by his side. They weren't watching. They ran because they were frightened. And yet, as we've seen in What Now, and as we know, that this isn't the end of their story. That Jesus, after he rose again, sought them out to restore a relationship with them. Though they ran in his time of need, Jesus still loved them. Never believe you are too far gone. Never believe you have done something too messed up for you to return to God. God loves you, and there is literally nothing that you can do to repel the love of God. And some of you live in prisons of your past because the enemy comes and he constantly tells you that God can't love you, God can't accept you. Nobody can love you. Nobody can accept you because of what you've done, because of how you've blown it, because of the mistakes that you've made. You are too far gone for God to love you or want to do anything with you. God is repelled by you, and nothing could be further from the truth. God has seen your failures. He's seen your faults. He's seen your mistakes, and he still loves you desperately. So what does all this mean? Verse 33 tells us this. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So what's the result for us? What's the result for us? That as followers of Jesus, we could experience peace. That we could experience peace. The peace is found in a relationship with Jesus. We've seen it on display time and time again. It's highlighted sometimes by celebrities. But we've seen it. Many of us have experienced ourselves. Where all of the things we chase after, we are convinced, and we convince ourselves that only if I achieve this, only if I acquire this, then will I find fulfillment. Then will I find peace. If only I could be in a relationship with that person. If only I could achieve this milestone. If only I had accomplished this, then I would finally be at peace. And what happens? We see it all the time. That it's never enough. That it's never good enough. And it only leaves for wanting more. And the angst and the anxiety that overtakes our lives all as a result of the lack of peace. And we search and we wonder, why am I not experiencing peace? And the answer is because we were created for more. We were created for more. We were created to have a relationship with our Creator. And it isn't until there's a total lack of peace that we understand just how valuable the promise of peace is. And sometimes that lack of peace is because our world is crumbling and everything that we've sought after is falling apart, and nothing brings us joy and fulfillment even though we achieve it. And sometimes that lack of peace is because we've gotten everything we wished for, only to discover that that too leaves us empty and wanting so much more. And the message of Jesus is that in Him we can have peace. In Him we can discover peace, so we don't have to live lives that are filled with angst and emptiness. But notice what else He says. In the world, you will have tribulation. In the world, you will have trouble. We see this obviously on full display right now. I'm not going to go through the litany of everything that we have seen unfold over the last couple months, but we're like, you think we'll have trouble? That may seem like an understatement right now. This world's nothing but trouble right now. We have pandemics, we have racial tension, we have riots, we have all of this unrest, and nobody seems to know what to do, and everybody's scratching their heads and pulling out their hair, and it's just on a constant loop. And it's just, there's so much anxiety, and nobody has any answers, and there's so much uncertainty, and nobody knows what to do, and it's being jammed down our throats everywhere we turn. And even if you try to do a good job of not just being inundated with it, don't worry. Now your devices will send you notifications, so you don't have to seek out the news. They'll push it to you. And so while you're just trying to enjoy dinner with your family, oh, here's the latest video of how our world is falling apart, and you can't escape it. And it seems like there's nowhere to go. And you look and you're like, what is there ever going to be normal again? What is happening? And the promise of Jesus is, in this world, you will have trouble. There have been pandemics before, and there will be pandemics again. There's been racial tension before, and while we hope it ends, even if it does, there will just be new tension about something else. Again, there's been war before. There will be war again. And if this is our hope, if this is what we're putting all of our hope into, our lives and our futures are hopeless. And don't miss it. Don't miss it. Because notice how Jesus ends this verse. But take heart. I have overcome the world. I just want to ask you a question this morning. Are you encouraged? You're like, this guy's out of his mind. Am I encouraged? How can we be encouraged? What's there to be encouraged about? Are we encouraged? Because while our world is falling apart, and while there is real, legitimate trouble seemingly everywhere we turn, and that's not to minimize any of the things that are very real and very important. My question is, have we allowed ourselves to become captive to the news reports? Have we allowed ourselves to become captive to fear? Have we allowed ourselves to see how everything's going to hell around us and just convinced ourselves that there is no hope? Have we just become paralyzed by every image that we see and the constant onslaught of everything that we hear? And have we just said that we're hopeless and there's nothing we can do because we're hit with it constantly? And understand this, there is a very real adversary, and his desire is to kill. And as followers of Jesus, he can't kill us. But he will then try to steal our joy. The thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And the enemy wants to destroy you. But if he can't do that, he will settle to distract you. And when we turn every way and we see nothing but hardship. We see nothing but death and despair no matter where we turn. It's easy to become distracted. It's easy to forget that our future is not in this world, that we are first and foremost citizens of heaven. And while we live in this world is not our destiny. But when we're inundated with all of the news, it becomes very easy to lose the focus for where we ultimately reside and where we ultimately belong. And it becomes very easy to focus on the here and the now and to focus on all of the trouble that we see constantly. And this is not a call to be irresponsible. This is not a call to bury our heads in the sand and to not speak out on important issues and not to try to change the world. It's not a call for any of that, but it is a reminder for those of us who follow Jesus that this world is not our destiny. And the news report every night that we get does not determine our final outcome. That God is greater than every scenario and every situation we encounter. That He is bigger than our circumstances. And that we can live lives of peace even in the midst of so much trouble. And the way that we can do that is to remember who Jesus is and what He's done. That ultimately, hope is available to every single one of us. No matter our past, no matter our mistakes, no matter what we've done, the love of God is extended to you with the promise that if you would confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you would be saved. That you would find salvation there. That frees you of your past. That makes you new. And provides you hope in hopeless times. That makes it so in the midst of all of this chaos and turmoil, that you can live a life of peace. Because peace is not dependent upon you. Peace is not dependent upon your circumstances. And the more you chase after your circumstances and the more you try to discover peace in your circumstances, the more you discover just how true that is. But it's available through Jesus. That we will face trouble in this world. And we've seen that on full display. But take heart. Take heart. Do not allow yourself to lose hope. Do not allow yourself to lose sight of the fact that God is greater than anything this world has to throw at us. God is bigger than our circumstances. God is greater than anything we can experience. And he says, if you're a follower of mine, you take heart. Because I'm greater. And maybe today you just need to remember that. That God is greater than the coronavirus. God is greater than racism. God is greater than injustice. God is greater than anything this world has to throw our way. He's bigger. And He's in control. And as people who follow Jesus, we need to keep this at the forefront of our minds and at the forefront of our lives. We have to constantly remember that God is bigger than anything we encounter. No matter what we face, God is greater and He is bigger, because we have an incredible opportunity to be light to this very dark world. And the darker this world gets, the more need for light that there is. And we have been called to be the light of the world. And we aren't good lights when we walk around constantly in fear. We must remember that all of the circumstances and all the situations that we encounter now do not define our destiny. That Jesus is bigger, and in Him we can have peace. Because He's greater than anything we face. So take heart and remember, no matter what's thrown your way, no matter what we see, that God is bigger than the darkest circumstances we'll ever encounter. God, I pray that we would be people who find peace in You. I pray that in all the chaos, all the madness of this world, we wouldn't lose sight. I pray for the person that's here, the person that's watching, that needs to discover peace because they need a relationship with You. And I pray, God, right now is the moment that they make the decision to confess with their mouth that You are Lord. To believe all that You have done. Jesus, that You are God, that You love them, that You came to this world and lived a perfect life and died upon a cross for their sin. 3 days later, rose again, proving You are greater. I pray for the person that's living in a prison of their past. And I pray, God, you would just remind them in their heart and in their spirit right now. You would remind them of your incredible love for them. The past does not have to define them. God, I pray for those of us who follow you, that we would not live lives of fear, that we would not allow ourselves to become paralyzed because we see report after report after report. But we would remember that you are greater. That in the moments when we are shaken, in the moments when we are uncertain, we would cling to the fact that you are bigger than anything we'll encounter. And anything this world has to throw our way. God, embolden us. Encourage us. And reassure us. Help us take heart. promise you at some point this week, you're going to see some bad news. Hopefully it'll just be the world at large, but it may hit a lot closer to home. And the question then is, how do we respond? I want to remind you, take heart. Jesus is greater than anything this world can throw your way. And the hardship of this world and the disaster and destruction that's all around us does not determine your destiny as a follower of His. So, church, let's be encouraged. And let's remember that God is greater. Cling to that this week. Thanks so much for joining us. God bless you guys. See you next week.